Welcome to session L11, Careers for Physicists in Medical Physics. I'm Shelley Lesher, and I'm chairing this session for you today. I want to let you know to adhere to the APS Code of Conduct, not just in your interactions around the conference, but also in asking questions during the Slido. Please enter your questions in the Q&A tab of the chat box on the right-hand side. And do not enter questions for the presenter in the chat tab of the box. Actually, it's not on the DNP site. Also, if you want to network with the presenters after the session, click on Join After Session Networking button located on the lower left side of your screen. So I would like to welcome our first speaker, Krishni Vijay Surya, and so we'll take it from there.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Krishni Vijay Surya, and I'm from University of Virginia. This is a great opportunity to introduce the field of medical physics to all of you. And I thank the APS and the Division of Nuclear Physics for giving us this opportunity. So I'll go right to my outline. Can you see my slides?
Krishni, can you put in a presentation mode?
1 second. Thank you for telling me that.
That's good.
I'm just trying to go to the... Okay, hang on. So go back. So this is my outline. I would first go through my career change to medical physics and explain to you the available branches of medical physics, essential tools in medical physics, and I'll go deeper into the field of radiation oncology, which is one of the subfields of medical physics. Briefly touch on future directions in research and how to become a medical physicist. And finally, I would conclude with a bit about this session and individual speakers that you are going to see. So my career in medical physics, my career basically started with brainfluid and photons. So I used to be a nuclear physicist, and my PhD is also in nuclear physics. So when I was working for my PhD thesis at Jefferson Lab, and following that at Argonne National Lab as a postdoc in nuclear physics, I work with brainfluid and photons. So as you all know, electrons heat a radiator and it creates the brainfluid photons. In the case of nuclear physics, I use a high energy photons, GeV energy regime. But the thing is, I am using the same phenomenon now in medical physics, but in a lower energy regime, megavoltage energies. And my target is not a solid target, it's a very precious patient. So these are some of my publications from brainfluid and photons in nuclear physics world. And in 2002, I came across the Physics Today cover magazine of proton therapy machine, and that changed my life and my career. So basically, I found out that we can use the same tools I've known and used to love. The particle detection as well as the photon transport, particle transport could be applied for cancer treatment. So hence, since then, I've switched fields and done a postdoc and gone through the board exams, and I'm now a qualified medical physicist. And I have multiple tasks in my current occupation. So my career in medical physics. Today, I'm a board certified faculty medical physicist at the University of Virginia in the Department of Radiation Oncology. My career consists of three main components: provide clinical medical physics services to radiation oncology, work on research projects and write grants, and also to educate the next generation, undergraduates, graduate students, medical physics residents, and medical residents. Who are medical physicists? This is a field that is not very open to many of the undergraduates, even the graduate students for many in many universities. So this is one of the reasons that I thought of giving this presentation and organizing this session. So medical physicists are the professionals with education and specialized training in the concepts and techniques of applying physics in medicine. Medical physicists work in clinical, academic, or research institutions. So these are the main branches of medical physics. Therapeutic medical physics, where most of the medical physicists work today. Diagnostic medical physics, nuclear medical physics, and medical health physics. Sometimes in a department or an institution, you might have to take one or more of these professions, merge them together to make your daily life. So here's there are two discoveries that came across for the beginning of the inception of radiation therapy or medical physics. So Wilhelm Röntgen discovered the X-rays in 1901. So as you can see from this image, it is not just X-rays that he discovered. He also proved from this image you can use it as an imaging device that penetrates through even the bony anatomy at that time, more than a century ago. And then Marie Curie discovered the spontaneous radiation and radioactivity. So this also two of these inventions mainly led to the field of radiation oncology and the medical physics. Even today, our International Day of Medical Physics is Marie Curie's birthday, November 7th. So we need some more tools to actually work in this field. So one major discovery that we use as bread and butter in our field is the computer tomography, so CT scanning. So Gottfried Hounsfield and Alan Komak got the Nobel Prize for designing this technique and showing to the world that this is possible in 1979. So if you have a patient, for example, if you look at this cartoon picture here, if the patient is lying down on a table or a couch, and you have a X-ray source with kilovoltage photon energies, and it goes through the patient because we know photons go right through you, high energy photons. And then you have a detector system right across from that. And imagine this X-ray source is rotating around your patient's body. And at the end of this exercise, you will have multiple incident intensities and exit intensities that is detected from the detector system. And you can put them all together and basically solve for a bunch of differential equations to obtain a 3D volumetric data set with different intensities. So here in the bottom plot, you can see such created image. So CT actually, these CAT scans, revolutionized the radiation therapy treatment planning. For example, it gave us not just the image, which we use on a daily basis to draw and contour the tumor as well as the critical structures surrounding that. It also gives us voxel by voxel attenuation map. So when you have, even though these CT scanners are from kilovoltage energies, which we know photoelectric effects is governed by, after you obtain this attenuation map, you can apply that in a megavoltage energy regime where we can treat the patients in the cancer therapy. So there are some other imaging devices that are daily we use for patient-specific treatment planning and delivery. One of them are the positron emission tomography. So Paul Dirac theorized the Dirac equation and got the Nobel Prize in 1933. And Carl Anderson discovered the positron and received the Nobel Prize in 1936. Furthermore, Greg Van Hervey developed the radioactive tracers. And these three together allowed us to come up with the positron emission tomography. What happens in there is you have a FDG of the for example, fluorine-18, a radioactive tracer that is given with the FDG type of sugar material injected into the IV of the patient. And it will go through the patient's body. And we know that the tumors are very active and absorbs high in metabolism. It will absorb more of the material. And then when you have a detector system where the electron is that emitted positron is annihilated with the photon, electron, it basically emits 2 photons that are detected by this detectors array and creates you the photon positron emission tomography. Here you can see the tumor of the head and neck cancer. Here are some more examples. So this is a lung cancer patient. So there are 3 panels here. The top panel is basically showing the pre-treatment before the treatment of the patient, the cancer area in high activity. And the middle panel is right at the end of the treatment. And the bottom panel is, you can see after 3 months post-radiation therapy, the tumor has shrunk quite a bit. So it's not just we use the PET for the imaging to detect the cancer, it also use PET on a daily basis to evaluate the efficacy of the treatments. Another imaging modality we use on a daily basis is the magnetic resonance imaging. As many of you might be already very familiar with this technique. So NMR led to the spin turning off from the magnetic field that creates the NMRI system, which is very good for the soft tissue contrast. Here's an example compared to the CAT scans. So the left-hand side is the diagnostic MRI for liver cancer on the top panel and brain cancer in the bottom panel. So compared to the CAT scan, you can see MRI has higher soft tissue contrast, and we always use MRI scan in addition to the CT scan when we treat cancers in the abdomen as well as the brain. So now I am going to go deeper into radiation oncology. Up until now, the imaging modalities that I described are equally used in the diagnostic imaging as well as radiation therapy. So I am in radiation oncology, so you'll hear more from others also about different fields. So we know that high energy radiation kills cells. It goes right through you, can easily penetrate deep into the human body, and can be delivered in a highly collimated as an intense beam. Therefore, it is an ideal tool to kill cancerous tumors. But the challenge is to kill the cancer while not harming the healthy tissues. So this is where the medical physicists come into play, because every medical physicists basically manage the accuracies of every single equipment and every single planning system, software, hardware in a radiation oncology department. So for example, when a treatment delivery machine arrives in a cancer center, medical physicists are the ones who accept the machines, commission the machines, define the protocols, educate everybody, advise the physicians what tools to use, how to use, what energies to use to a given tumor, what kind of modalities they should use. So it's not just the beginning of the process, we also have to maintain daily, monthly, annually the same accuracy, whether it's positioning accuracy, dosimetric accuracy, or IGRT imaging accuracies. Actually, in a radiation oncology department, physicist is an integral part of a radiation oncology department, and legally they cannot treat patients without a medical physicist. That's why we have to take boards to be qualified at the end. So I want to show you some of the things which daily medical physicists deal with in radiation oncology department. So this is 6 MV photon beams. So most of the time what we deal with is not the energy distribution. What we deal with is how much dose is deposited when the photon beam traverses through the material. So the y-axis here is basically the percentage depth dose. So first off, dose is the unit we use in radiation oncology departments. That basically is the energy deposited per unit mass. So you can see As the photon beam hits the patient's surface and goes along into the patient, the maximum dose point is about 1.5 centimeters for a 6 MV beam. And it keeps decreasing around 10 centimeter depth. It is about 67%. So, but the thing is, we use multiple beam arrangements focusing on the tumor, so we can kill the tumor while reducing dose to the healthy tissue. Similarly, we can also use protons. So protons has a cleaner beam. What I mean by that is it's same thing here, the depth dose curves, but you can see it traverses through the patient and it suddenly deposits all of its energy on the tissue, and then exit beam fluence is completely almost zero. So therefore, if you have pediatric patients or critical structures that you really have to be careful about, in certain scenarios, we would send the patient to a proton therapy department. So here I only talked about photons and protons, but you also have other techniques that we use with different departments. Here's an example of a treatment machine. So I took this. This is from Velo Medical Systems, a company from Palo Alto. And I also want to point out throughout my talk that medical physicists are innovators. There's so much opportunity for you to make something new, improve something, and make your own company. And I'll show you some examples of such incidents. So Velo Medical Systems was actually a spin-off of Stanford University. Two scientists came up with the klystron, and then they made their company. It's actually even today in Palo Alto. So you can see here is the klystron, and then you can see this is the treatment head. For example, if you compare these to the high energy machines like Jefferson Lab, where you have miles and miles of accelerating waveguides, here a waveguide is about 1 meter long. So it is not that long, not that big, because we don't go to that high energies. That is the reason. So you can see here it goes through the accelerator beam electrons are entered through here, and it accelerates the waveguide, and it comes here, and it goes through a bending magnet, the electrons, and then if you need the electrons, it passes through. But if you need the photons, you will have a target, you create the Benson photons, and you have collimation systems, 3 collimating systems, and it enters the patient's body. So the third collimator for this system is we normally call it a multi-leaf collimator. So you can see across this one of the leaves, it's about 15 centimeters thick tungsten alloy. So this could make any shape or size you wish to have. Depending on the size of the tumor and the critical structure surrounding it, you can modulate the beam, and we have accuracies of these positioning accuracy of these leaves about less than 1 millimeter. So here's an example of a treatment delivery with one of the machines. So you can see the multi-leaf collimator is modulating and positioning depending on the location or the control point of the gantry motion. So, and the dose delivery is shown on the second panel. And this whole delivery would be about 1 minute. So here's an example of a treatment plan. As I said earlier, the dose maps are shown by these different lines here. So you can see we are trying to treat this tumor, but it is of course near to other critical structures like the great vessels, the spinal cord, the chest wall. So we try to maintain the dose that are clinically relevant and below the threshold values for the other critical structures, while maintaining the full dose to 95 or 98% of the tumor volume. Here's another innovative idea. This is another machine, tomotherapy. It's also a radiation therapy delivery machine with a 6 MV gantry head mounted on this ring. And it was invented by a medical physics professor at University of Wisconsin. He came up with the idea, developed it. He also wrote codes for the treatment planning system. And after working on it for a decade or so, he sold the company to Accurate. So here's an example of those distributions from a tomotherapy planning system. For a head and neck case, head and necks are the most highest has the highest critical number of critical structures. So you have a lot of constraints to meet. And in this scenario, we are treating 2 tumors to go to 2 different dose values while maintaining all the critical structure doses below the threshold. So I gave you a little flavor of how the plans work and what type of beam arrangements we use and what type of modalities we use. And we also address the issue of motion. So it's our 4th dimensions. So you can see here we are looking at this lung tumor. It keeps going in and out of the slice, so that if you are not accounting for the motion, either you will be irradiating more healthy tissue, or more important, you'll be missing the tumor. So the tumor that will never get cured if you do not actually target it. So that's crucial that we try to target the tumor. So there's, of course, research has been going on to track the tumor with the motion of the tumor. And Paul Keel, a professor from medical physics from University of Sydney, actually has developed many algorithms, and even now it is research work is going on. So future of radiation therapy is very exciting. It's a great time to join the field of medical physics. So it's a very interdisciplinary field. Some of these things some of the things that so dear to my heart I'm presenting here. These are not all the opportunities and all the new advancements that are happening. If you don't see what you were thinking about, please ask any of these speakers afterwards. We'll be happy to explain any of the things that we haven't presented here. So nanoparticles to transport radiosensitivities is one of the topics that the ongoing research. So the idea is to increase the therapeutic ratio. So if the nanoparticles go and stick to the tumor volume, it will absorb more dose from the same treatment while reducing the dose of the healthy tissue. We also have new imaging modalities, identify the new imaging modalities to evaluate the tumor resistance, the oxygenation, and cell proliferation. There's also effort to use the genetic markers to guide the treatment, because not every patient is its own individual self. They are different, their genetic makeup is different, so it has to be taken into account, especially with the machine learning algorithms available today and the past data. We can mine this data to come up with new guidelines using these genetic markers and model the tumor microenvironment. Very recently, there was a session, meeting with the DOE, Department of Energy, and NCI collaborate together to use the high-performing computing clusters to enable the modeling of the tumor microenvironment using the available data. So there's also effort going on, radiomics for characterizing of the tumor, radiation therapy toxicity, and efficacy of the treatments. And so there's a lot of efforts towards AI-based auto planning. So here's an example of the biomarker that I talked about earlier. So one of my slides already talked about the 18F FDG-based PET imaging, and there's something FLT is for cell proliferation detection, F-MISO for hypoxia, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of work going on, and there will be a lot of effort in the future to separate and disentangle these different components of the tumor microenvironment. We also have efforts going on for quantitative imaging. So for example, if you have a tumor that is before treatment, you have the PET imaging as shown in the top panel, and post-treatment, you can see the activity has gone away, but this is just a visualization. You have so much more data available that you can use to quantify the accuracies and the specificities and the efficacy of the treatments, and there's a lot of effort going on in this field. There's also machine learning techniques for quantitative radiomics biomarkers, as I have shown here. You can use any different imaging technique, whether it's the PET or the CT or the MRI. You can use radiomics for feature extractions, intensity-based features, shape-based features, so on and so forth, and put them all into a machine learning algorithm from the available clinical trial-based data, and to tease out the important components for the parameter that you are interested in, whether it is the disease-free survival, whether it is the overall survival, or just the tumor cell kill. So AI, as I said before, applications of AI is everywhere in radiation therapy. It is there's so much effort going in different institutions for starting from the treatment decision making to all the way to the follow-up care. For example, you can see the decision support system, depending on the patient's genetic markup, you can come up with the patient-specific treatment plan, treatment decision, what modality to use, what fractionation to use, all those information using AI. And image simulation, same thing. AI promises to reduce the radiation exposure to the patients, enhance the image quality, suppress the artifacts, and enable more accurate image registrations. Again, treatment planning, then that's the third step in the line of treating a patient. Automated tumor segmentations, optimal dose prescriptions, and also auto planning. And you can see then the radiation therapy delivery. You can use enhanced image guidance techniques and motion management techniques to verify and target the tumor the way you plan to do. And then finally, the follow-up care after the treatment, we can use AI to predict the response. How much time will it take the tumor to respond? What is the best treatment modality for that particular patient? For example, is it just the radiation therapy or radiation therapy versus immunotherapy, and so on and so forth? This data could be modeled using AI for the benefit of the patient. So in the future, there will be a lot of effort going into modeling the tumor microenvironment. So there are three components here as shown: multi-omics like genetics, genomics, radiomics, and different types of other omics in here. And then you can put all these different network structures to see T-cell proliferation, radiation-induced immune suppression, or radiation-induced immune increase. All those things added together, and using mathematical models, we should be able to predict and use the best technique and to save the patient's life. So this is similar to the slide I showed earlier. There's so much data available and very little is being used right now. And AI and machine learning will be able to probe these data and come up with the best predictive models for the immune response. And finally, this is we know that the radiation does a lot of different things, even though right now we are not using it. For example, radiation creates the immune cells, and then it creates the danger signals and increases the tumor cell suppression, and dendritic cells are going to be presented, and it will be the dendritic cells will be used to activate the other immune cells, and it goes in a cycle for the lymph nodes and comes back on the other side. So these things are all to first order modelable. Just think of this when I look at this thing, how I look at this in nuclear physics background. So imagine we try to look at the strong force between nucleons. When you try to do that, in the first order of business, we will not find everything correctly, but then we can add new correction factors and keep going and compare the data. We should be able to tease out the most important parts and create models that would help the patients at the end of the day, patients, benefit of the patients. So I'm going to switch gears for a little bit. So how do you become a medical physicist? There are multiple pathways. So this is a standard pathway. Many has taken, but I didn't take this pathway, and many of the speakers has also not taken this pathway. So if you have an undergraduate degree in physics or the physical sciences, you can go to a PhD in medical physics in a campus-approved program, and then you can go to a clinical residency, they pass the boards, and then you can become a qualified medical physicist. But this is not the only pathway. These are all actually, I download these things from the American Association of Physics in Medicine, that if you are interested in, you can do that too. So I wanted to go to the alternate pathway here. So if you do have a PhD in another field already, to pursue a career in medical physics is still possible. You basically have to go through a CAMPEP approved certificate program and then get into the residency program and pass the board. So I would like to spend a couple of minutes on the rest of the session. So I think we have a great session prepared for you. This session consists of presentations covering a wide range of branches from medical physics, such as radiation therapy, diagnostic imaging, clinical, industry, research, and teaching. So the authors might not be in the right order here, but Dr. Chen Persley will, from Mass General Hospital, will be talking to you about from particle physics to medical physics, her experience. Dr. Madhuka Kaluarachi from Brown University will be talking to you about the transitioning into medical physics. Dr. Chris Williams from Brigham and Women's Hospital will be talking to you about the medical physics as a career for astrophysicists. Dr. Chen will be talking to you from University of Kentucky, and Karana Medical LLC will be talking to you about the medical physics career opportunities in industry and entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great introduction to the session. And also thank you for letting everyone know what's coming up. If you have any questions, please type them into the box. We do have a few minutes for questions. I do have one, which is, how well did your background in nuclear physics prepare you for medical physics?
So in terms of computation and particle transport and understanding what happens within the patient's body when you aim a photon or the electron beam, I was quite clear when it came. So only thing that I had to work other than extra was the biology part. It's not much, but you just have to have a basic anatomy and physiology and imaging that actually is quite easy. And actually, yeah, I just want to touch on one subject before I move on, just to tell you. So even though I have a PhD in nuclear physics, my current research is on this subject. So it is actually, anything is possible. It's not that hard.
So we have a question coming in. Do there exist financial aid opportunities when transitioning to medical physics and completing the certificate program after finishing a PhD? Because as you know, most of us are used to getting our, education paid for after undergrad. Yeah. So what does the financial landscape look like after that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are certain institutions, you can become a postdoc in medical physics, and they would, the PI would basically cover your the certificate program, basically the cover that cost. And some actually have it merged so that they get these kids into certificate programs, and they already are signing up for both the postdoc position as well as the certificate program. And some places you would do a postdoc and then you will have to take the online courses. So it is covered.
Yeah, I like to jump in that, I know that Memorial Sloan Kettering Institution offers a postdoc program and includes a certificate in that. And also UT Southwestern.
Wisconsin also, where Ranjita came from, yeah.
Okay, because I was just going to ask, how do you find one of these programs that will, include, while you work as a postdoc, include those programs? But thank you. You answered that question without even being asked. Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, I thank you for giving such a great talk, because this is a field that is very interesting to a lot of undergrads that I teach, and also I'm sure a lot of them in the audience, and a lot of undergrads that are doing nuclear physics, I know, are interested in pursuing a career in medical physics. So I thank you for such a great overview of, kind of your favorite things.
Thank you.
So I will clap for everyone. And next up is medical physics career opportunities in industry and entrepreneurship by Chen.
Hello, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. So before I start, I want to mention that for career in industry and entrepreneurship, you don't have to get a medical physics degree or certificate. So that's, but if you have that, that also works. So first, I briefly introduce my background. I physics student, get my bachelor degree in physics, and spent 2 years graduate school in physics before I switched to the medical physics. And I like to mention that my subject in the medical physics, my PhD is in ultrasound imaging. But after I graduated, I immediately worked for a radiation therapy company, and nothing related to my PhD. So for you guys, you worry about switching field. It's nothing. It's just like Christian said, it's pretty easy to adjust. And then I, go back to, as a clinical physicist at the University of Virginia, and then goes to University of Kentucky as an academic physicist. And then I, during that time, I co-founded a company and received some SBIR funding. So basically, I was experiencing all aspects of medical physicist. So that makes me, have an experience to talk about as an industry and entrepreneurship. But I have to put some disclaimer that, all I have is just my personal view. All know about the story of blind man and elephant, right? So it probably, my perspective is not a whole picture. But, preparing this talk, I also talked with a few of my friends, Hao Jiang, he got a PhD in nuclear engineering. And after he graduated, he worked for Bucher, making the instruments and detectors. And later he started his own company doing some AI research. And Ming Hui, he's got a PhD in particle physics. And he worked in PerkinElmer and the Varix, and now reflection. So going from imaging to a therapy company, a medical device company. And also Yi Hu, who got a PhD in geophysics, but now he worked for Canon Medical Research. So again, those are examples of people who does not have a formal medical physics education, but they are working in the medical device industry as a research physicist. So, why working in the industry? We look at the, market size for medical imaging related, it's like 44 billion. And then for radiation therapy, the market is, 10 billion. And for nuclear medicine, which involve PET, and even in future, there will be a lot of use of radiopharmaceuticals. And those have a market size of 2 billion. So you see that it's a very big market. So that gives you a lot of job opportunities potentially. So, and there's a lot of potential jobs in the industry. So you can play many roles in a company, and you can be a research physicist doing research and development, or you can be a clinical support physicist who does, help to support the product. And for research physicists, you most likely will need a PhD. But for clinical support physicists, the PhD is not required. You can have a master. When I work in tomotherapy, I have very good colleague who they are master level physicists, but they are very smart and they do a lot of contribution to the company. And also I know that, because I try to apply for industry grant, and a lot of those industry grant in the company, the manager of those grant are medical physicists because they know the problem that we try to solve. But of course, those have a limited number of positions, and there's other roles. And in the company, you have a ladder to climb. You can go take VP or research or something like that. But, that's probably out of scope. Because of my experience mainly for doing research, so I'm just mainly focus my talk in the research physicist. So you, as a research physicist, you're focusing in innovation. And when I was doing this research, innovation physicist, my day-to-day activity mainly includes reading journal papers, and then we have meetings to brainstorm ideas. We have identify some issues that we want to solve, we want to tackle, and then we want to have some ideas how to solve that, and then we go ahead and design those research studies and execute them. And after we finish, we write manuscript and presentations or reports to within the company, or to report nationally, attend APM and publish in medical physics. And also we help to prepare patent applications. So it's kind of similar to academic physicists who focus on research, but we don't have to involve with ground writing and no teaching. And of course we requires a PhD degree and a strong motivation to do research. I will introduce some examples. Some project I participated when I was working in tumor therapy. One project is GPU accelerated dose calculation. So in radiation therapy treatment planning, it requires a calculation of radiation dose to patient. And at that time, our company used a convolution superposition algorithm, which have a good accuracy, but it's kind of time consuming and it needed a lot of computing power. And also to do treatment planning optimization, it requires a calculation of thousands of beamlet dose. So that's thousands of dose calculations. So in the end, we had to use an expensive IBM Blake cluster, so multiple computers to do this job. And even with that higher, valued, high-powered computer cluster, we still have to batch beamlet to overnight. So when they want to do treatment planning, we recommend them to batch them overnight and start optimization the next day. So workflow is get impacted. At that time, in 2007, NVIDIA had a CUDA architecture available for scientific computing. So I was interested to use that to see whether it can accelerate our calculation. So I started by this project. And long story short, we achieved 10 to 20 times faster than even the expensive cluster, and saved the hardware cost saved from 100K to 3K. We also developed optimization on that GPU card, a single card, and get rid of the beamlet dose calculation. So now the user can immediately start the treatment optimization and able to get a treatment plan in 5 to 10 minutes. And we commercially release that as a Velo product. And recently, even for the cyberknife, there's a different radiation therapy device. We are using that for Velo to accelerate their dose calculation. So I have also involved with other projects, including Velo. There's also dynamic jaws and the delivery analysis. So we have a machine that's like over 500 machines was, Tumor, and they all able to use the feature that I developed. So why the industry need a physicist? Because many problems are physics related, so they need a physicist. But also because that physicists have the right balance between training and mathematics and physics and scientific programming. So we have the perfect balance, and we have the problem solving skill through our education, and we know how to make approximations, simplifications, corrections to solve the problem. And here is the example when we do this GPU-based dose calculation. Traditionally using kernel, which is this blue curve. It's what's being Monte Carlo calculated. What we do is we doing an exponential fit of the kernel. So this red curve. And you see that it's not a perfect match. right? So there's some, this is only approximation. But by doing this approximation, we show that it can, due to the feature, without this approximation, so for calculating dose to the third voxel, we have to calculate 3 terms. And then to calculate the dose to the fourth voxel, we have to calculate 4 terms. So we add up. But because we use exponential kernel, we can simplify the problem. So now to calculate the dose to the fourth voxel, we just need the dose calculated for the third voxel, adding a term, multiple term, and then adding an extra term. So we can dramatically reduce the computation complexity from O(n) to O(1). And so while in our colleague have a computer scientist, they get a PhD in computer science. I mean, they're, no disrespect, they can help us to, to speed up, optimize by code, but they can never do that, optimization, speed up using this approach, because they don't, this is scientific programming, this is physics related. So they are not, educated to do those things, but the physicists can. And another example is when I involved is doing some smoothing, MVCT. So our megavoltage CT have a noise. So in the computer vision, graphics, they use so-called anisotropic diffusion to remove noise, but you also want to keep the contrast. So one of the methods they use is, is based on the heat diffusion equation, which our physicists we all familiar with. They start from that, which is isotropic diffusion, smoothing, but then they add some anisotropic term by introduce some extra, gradient factors. And another kind of a group developing those tensor-based. So they look at the local, gradient, and they can do some, establish a 2D matrix. They do SVD, single value deposition to get a principal component. And then they will make sure that they do a lot of diffusion along the feature edge, but stop the diffusion, perpendicular to the edge. So get better edge preserving and edge enhancement. So I implement those, algorithms, and we get the result of, doing the, Scala-based diffusion. It'll keep some features, but still have blurry. But with the tensor-based, you have, enhancement of the features. And again,
by implementing those algorithms, you need a, solve differential equation, numerical solution, which is when we are physics student, we all, familiar with. So, and I will summarize that as a pro, as an industry physicist, the pro is that, you are keeping the leading edge of the technology, and especially that your research can have broad impact on patient care. So it's not a use benefit for one clinical practice. You are used by all clinical practice that use your company product. And you have a lot of existing code infrastructure equipment available. You don't have reinvented the wheel. And we have a lot of capabilities and more time to work, conduct research, and you don't worry about writing grants. And most importantly, if you don't want to go through the clinical, ABR process or, take a ChemPep graduate program in medical physics, you can do that. And cons is that, you don't have.
I'm sorry, Dr. Chen.
Okay.
I have to cut you off. You're done with your time. You've gone into questions, but I think we can leave this up for a second. Well, thank you very much for a great talk. I am very sorry I have to cut you off. It's been very good. So I want to thank you, and I want to introduce our next speaker, and that is Madhuka Kalyukarchi, who's going to be talking about transitioning into medical physics. So, Dr. Chen, if you could.
Yeah. Let me find my control. Sorry.
Can you see my screen?
There you go. Yes. Could you make it big?
Oh, yes, sure. Okay.
There we go. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Madhu Kaluvarachi. I'm a medical physics resident at Rhode Island Hospital. So today I'll be talking about my transition into medical physics. So as you already heard from Dr. Vijay Surya's talk, medical physics is a branch of physics that where we apply physics concepts and principles into medicine. Mainly there are four branches, namely therapeutic, diagnostic, nuclear medicine, and health physics. So I'm working in therapy physics, working in a radiation oncology department. Some of the very general responsibilities of a medical physicist include providing clinical service and consultation, doing research and development work, and some teaching. So typically, most of the clinical medical physicists work in a hospital environment. These are some of the few of the many things we do as medical physicists. In my case, as a resident, we do radioactive seed implants in patients. We work with treatment delivery equipment to make sure that they function properly, doing quality assurances. Sometimes we introduce new technologies into the clinic. Sometimes we do radiation therapy treatment planning. So the problems we get in the clinic daily are very different. So we work with a team of physicians, physicists, therapists, and dosimetrists to tackle these problems, which make it really exciting, working with a multidisciplinary team. And above all, actually, we get to see the patients we treat every day. We see the progress of the treatment. So that really keeps us motivated. So this is a career path I took to get here. So I completed my bachelor's degree at University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. And I came to the US to pursue my PhD in physics at University of Virginia. After graduation, I completed 2 postdoctoral fellowships, one at St. Jude Children's Hospital, the second one at Rhode Island Hospital. So during this time, I completed my medical physics certificate program at Harvard University, and currently I'm a medical physics resident. So these are the different pathways you can take to get into medical physics. I think you already saw some of these almost similar slide. The highlighted one is the path I took, which is very similar, very common for physics PhD holders or PhD holders in non-medical physics fields to get into the field. So you do a PhD and you get into postdoc, take a certificate program, and then you become eligible to apply for medical physics residencies. If there are any undergraduate students listening to the talk, you can either you have much more straightforward pathway, by the way. So you can do a master's degree in medical physics, which is about 2 years, or PhD in medical physics, which will take about 4 to 6 years. And you become eligible to apply for residencies after that. Or you can take a professional doctorate in medical physics, we call DMP. So DMP programs are basically bundled. They have bundled a master's degree and a residency together. So it will take about 4 years, but you can apply for board exams right after that. So one thing you have to keep in mind is most of the master's programs in medical physics, as well as the DMP programs, are not typically funded. So you have to pay out of pocket. And also PhDs in medical physics, only about 30% of the programs are fully funded. So once you take the residency program, you are eligible to take ABR board examinations if you are interested in to become a clinical medical physicist or qualified medical physicist. If you're not interested working in a clinic, you can always get into academia and industry. So I'd like to share some of the steps I took when I was transitioning into the field. So in my 3rd year in my graduate school, I decided I want to pursue a career in fundamental physics. So I was kind of slowly shifting towards medical physics. So I started gathering information, reading articles about the field. There are some graduate programs have open houses. I attended a few of them just to see the facilities, see what they have to say about the field, and to get a feel about of the area. And I did a couple of informational interviews with people at different stages in their medical physics career. That really helped me to gain some insight. And I also realized that the thesis project that I was working at that time would not help me to get into medical physics. So I looked at a couple of postdoctoral job advertisements in the AAPM career website to see what are the skills I need to get a postdoc in medical physics. And at that time, actually, Monte Carlo simulations stood out. So I talked to my advisor. He was really helpful, Dr. Gordon Cates. He helped me to make a transition with my thesis project, so I can start learning Monte Carlo simulations and apply that into my physics research. At the same time, I talked to a medical physicist at our university hospital. Actually, Dr. Vijay Surya, you listened to her talk earlier. She not only helped me to get a much closer look at the field, but also she was willing to get me involved in one of her projects. So it worked out really well because by the time I graduated, I not only learned Monte Carlo simulations, also had applied into medical physics. So when I was going for interviews, I could convince them, so I could be helpful into the field. So when I was closer to graduation, I was looking for postdoctoral positions. So the main source was the AAPM career website. And apart from that, I looked up a couple of job posts in department websites. And I also started emailing faculty members who I thought might have potential postdoc positions. I had to do all that just to make sure I get a position, because in postdoc positions in medical physics are not that common, and it has to match with your skill set. So since I talked about Monte Carlo simulations, I'll show you a couple of things I did as my research. So I used Monte Carlo simulations in my PhD work to find the radiation sources along electron beam path, so we can design shielding. I have designed detectors. I have used Monte Carlo simulations to model electron therapy machines and also calculate out-of-field dose, as that is important, especially for pediatric patients or pregnant patients, and it can be a source of secondary cancers. I also developed new treatment techniques and improved them, so it can be helpful for patients. So a little bit about the certificate programs. So if you have a PhD in non-medical physics area, like physics, you don't have to go through a master's degree or PhD in medical physics again. You can get into a certificate program. Usually it's a 1-year program. It will cover all this coursework that make you eligible to apply for residency programs later on. So the tuition typically falls in this range. As Dr. Vijay Surya mentioned, some of the programs, if you will waive the tuition if you are a postdoc in their department. It is completely up to the program, and the tuition can range depending on the university. So the CAMPEP is the institution that accredits these certificate programs. And if you go to this website, you can find a list of institutions that are CAMPEP accredited certificate programs. And also you can find the PhD programs as well as residency programs in the same website. So the way residency programs work, you apply for a certain amount of a certain number of residency programs, and then you go for interviews, then you rank them. The programs will rank you, and based on an algorithm, you'll get matched into a residency position. So the residency programs will basically provide you the clinical and professional training to become a qualified clinical medical physicist. So typically these are 2-year-long programs. Yeah, some programs include research as well as the certificate program. So that can take up to like 3 years, and they are paid positions. So after completing residency, you can start working as a junior medical physicist, and you're eligible to take board examinations if you're interested in getting into the training. So these are the
sorry, Madhuka, that's time for you. We're into the question section, so you have about a minute until the complete end of your talk with no questions.
Okay. Yeah, I'm almost done. So these are the match results from last year, and the good news is, if you have a PhD from non-medical physics area and take a certificate program, you have about 70% chance of getting matched into into a residency question. So some of the challenges I'd like to encourage you to find the skill set you need to find a postdoc in medical physics. Now you have, with COVID-19, you have the opportunity of taking classes online. So if you're already in a graduate program, take the classes. It'll become easier. As international resident students, you have an additional challenge of getting visa. Not all programs sponsor H-1B, but you can apply for more positions. Or if you have permanent residency, that can increase the chances. These are my take-home points. It is a rewarding career. I'd like to encourage you to work with a medical physicist, find a postdoc. That's the easiest way to break into the field. And if you have a PhD in physics, do a certificate program that will increase the chances of getting into residency. I'd like to thank all the faculty members who helped me to get here. And I'd like to invite you to join medical physics.
Thank you. And we did have a talk in the questions, but you already answered it in your last couple of sections, which were, or a couple of slides, which was how they have a PhD in nuclear physics and what are the potential requirements to get a job in medical physics, postdoctorate or academia. And I think your last couple of slides
I think
discuss that.
Yes, I think the main thing is if you have a PhD in physics, try to get some skills. So in that time, it was Monte Carlo simulations for me, but then another field has evolved. Maybe it is machine learning now. So if you look at some job posts from APM website, if I go back to that slide, I think that's the best place to look for postdoc questions in medical physics. Look for the skills and then try to develop them while you're in graduate school. That will help you to, and definitely work with a medical physicist. Go to a clinic, work with medical physicists. Get some kind of exposure into the clinic. That will help to get a postdoc question.
Thank you. I do want to say we have one more speaker, and then we have a speaker that didn't show up, so we can continue the conversation in that empty 15 minutes before our final speaker. So we do have that option because there's another question that came in. So thank you, Madhuka. I now want to introduce Jennifer Persley, who's going to talk to us about the journey from particle physics to medical physics. I can see your slides.
Perfect. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here to join you in this session with these other great speakers. And as I was writing this talk, so I do follow Twitter quite a bit, and there was this popular trend on Twitter of how it started versus how it's going. So that's how I started my talk off. How did I start my career in medical physics? Well, I did my undergrad degree at a very small university that didn't have a graduate program. But I got some summer REU experiences in a couple areas of physics, and that led me to decide that I wanted to try out experimental particle physics for my PhD. So I applied to only a few grad schools. I was lucky enough to get into Johns Hopkins to work with a new assistant professor. It's a great experience. And I did my thesis research on the collider detector at Fermilab in high energy physics. And I have a couple of exciting results plots from, when I was from that period of time, which was like 2007 and 2010. So I was working on B physics, looking for new particles. As a postdoc at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I continued on CDF, and I was a leader of the high mass Higgs boson search. And right before I left Fermilab in 2010 was when we published our very first high mass Higgs exclusion at the Tevatron. So it was all very exciting, and I really loved particle physics. I also served in a lot of detector roles. So as a graduate student, I was a silicon detector expert, and then as a postdoc, I also became an operations manager. So I was in the control room, in charge of all of the detectors, making sure everything was running and data collection was going smoothly. Now, where am I at this point in my career? I've been certified to practice medical physics, therapeutic medical physics since 2014. I was employed at MGH right after residency. I'll talk about that a little bit. So since 2013 in the radiation oncology department. And I now actually have an assistant professor appointment with MGH and Harvard Medical School. My day-to-day work is widely varied. So there's a couple of pictures in here. One is showing me working on the weekend with one of our linear accelerators, making some measurements. I did not put the beautiful eyes and mask on the linear accelerator. Our therapists who treat the patients did that, but I really appreciate that they try to make the environment comforting for the patients. So my day-to-day, I might be fielding questions, usually physics related, not always necessarily, from our physicians or from other radiation oncology team members that are related to patient treatments, or some other aspect of the radiation planning. So they have something that they want a physicist to take a look at. I also have a lot of small research and development projects going on the side. I have my last slide lists some of those if we get to it. I don't have any grant funding, so I'm a clinical physicist primarily, and I'm paid by the hospital to be a clinical physicist. So all of the research and development happens on my own time. I do a lot of mentoring because that's something that I'm passionate about. So I mentor our residents and students on their research projects. I also do a lot of lecturing. I've been an adjunct professor at nearby universities, so I do quite a bit of education work. And then a lot of my day-to-day is what everyone's day-to-day is now, which is answering emails. I also write safety and quality assurance procedures and procedures for new treatment modalities to make sure that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. I check patient documentation to make sure that everything is ready before they start treatment. I participate in our professional organizations. I give research talks, I give career talks. I do a lot of stuff on the side that I really enjoy. So how did I get from one place to the other? Well, I mean, I loved particle physics, but a big component about working in particle physics or something that's omnipresent is that it's hard to find a permanent job in particle physics. So as a postdoc, I started thinking about what do I really enjoy about working at Fermilab, and what does that mean for me in terms of what do I want to do with the rest of my life? So one thing that I really enjoyed was the intellectual stimulation of being surrounded by smart people. And I really like problem solving. I like having problems handed to me and having the ability to come up with solutions and implement them. And that's something that is really fun. I also really enjoyed teaching even then, especially one-on-one, like mentoring. I knew that I liked being part of a team and that we would all be working towards a goal. So particle physics, obviously we work in huge collaborations, but we also, in order to get real work done, you work in much smaller teams on specific projects. And I really liked that small team environment. I also really enjoyed the hands-on work. I liked working with the detectors in the collision hall, and I really liked being an operations manager and kind of being in charge, knowing what's going on and making decisions. So those are the things I enjoyed. Things that I didn't like about being a particle physicist, I really didn't enjoy sitting alone in an office writing code all day long, which some of my days were. Like that was just, I wanted to have more people contact, more real world impact of what I was doing. And that was hard for me, like just sitting there writing code, you don't get to see the impact of your work, as it's a very long-term thing. You're making discoveries, but it's a very long-term process to see any real-world impact. And also, as I mentioned, there's not that many jobs available in particle physics. And as a student and postdoc, you're not accruing any retirement benefits. And I saw at Fermilab quite a few 40-year-old postdocs, and I didn't necessarily want to be one of those. So I started thinking about other options. And I was really excited to participate in this session because a session like this is exactly how I learned about medical physics. So the first time I heard of medical physics was in 2007, just as I was finishing my PhD, and it was at an April meeting session on alternatives to postdocs. But at that point, I had actually already committed to my postdoc at University of Wisconsin-Madison, so it was something that I tucked away in the back of my mind. And then in 2009, when I started thinking about leaving particle physics, I talked to my friend and CDF spokesperson, Rob Roser, about, what should I think of? Are there anybody that I could talk to? And he connected me with a bunch of ex-particle physicists who had gone on to other fields. So I talked to some people who were doing medical physics. I also talked to people who were working in the insurance industry. I talked to people who'd moved to Wall Street. Like I got to talk to a bunch of different people, and I settled on the two most appealing options to me were clinical medical physics in radiation oncology, because I would still get to work with accelerators. So that's the hands-on part. And I'd be doing work with real world impact on cancer patients, which was something that really appealed to me. The other thing I considered was public policy in science, actually, through the APS Congressional Science Fellowship. So I knew someone who had done that fellowship and then gone on to work in a congressperson's office. And that was also appealing just because, again, of the real world impact and using your science knowledge and problem solving. But in the end, and as a backup, I did apply to the very few faculty positions that were available in high energy physics that year. I believe there were 5 in all of the US. I got 1 interview, which was a great achievement. But I ended up getting an offer both for medical physics and for the public policy, and I ended up choosing medical physics. I felt very fortunate to be accepted into a residency program, the Harvard Medical Physics Residency Program, which is one of the few programs that can accept people from outside of a medical physics background, because Harvard has its own medical physics certificate course, which the residents can take for free. So I was able to get my certificate course, CampUp coursework done in my first year of the residency program, while I was also doing a medical physics research project. And then, so this is a 3-year residency, and the years 2 and 3 were our clinical training and any remaining coursework. And after you finish the residency, then you were eligible to sit for board certification. So, I will say that it wasn't easy necessarily to transition from one field to the other, especially going from being an operations manager and faculty candidate in one field to all of a sudden being a student in a new field. It was a big transition. It was a big switch to going back to doing homework and having to learn new things, especially like anatomy and oncology. These were things that were completely outside of my realm of experience. Also, the hospital environment was very different from Fermilab. I didn't know what a lot of people did. I had to learn. I had to learn the jobs of all these people. It wasn't like everyone was just a physicist anymore. I had to learn new skills. Obviously, the residency helped with that a lot. I also had to learn a lot of new jargon, just terms and anatomy terms, hospital terms that I wasn't familiar with. So I went from being an expert in one field to being a complete newbie in another field. And it took a little while for me to get used to that. I felt very unsure in the beginning, and I had to gain confidence in this new career. But having the residency program, which is a very structured 3-year program with designated mentors to help you along, for me, it was really helpful. And I think at the end of the 3 years, I did feel pretty confident in my new role. So I wanted to touch on what skills transferred from high energy physics to medical physics, and what I expected and what I see a lot now that I'm interviewing residency candidates that come from outside the field. I see a lot of people know, or they think that their scientific skills are what they are going to be like the biggest selling point to them. So I came in with a bunch of different programming experience. In my particle physics work, I had trained neural networks. I had done a lot of data analysis, Monte Carlo. I had problem solving. I had this deep physics understanding of accelerators and radiation. But what I look for in candidates and what they were looking for in me was the ability to work in a team, to have really good communication and leadership skills, what we kind of think of as the soft skills instead of the hard skills. So having those abilities, being able to communicate well with different role groups. And I would say that part of what impressed them when I applied for the residency program and interviewed was that I gave a very engaging presentation on particle physics that got them, even though it was outside of their field of expertise, it was really interesting to them. So being able to communicate and demonstrate these soft skills, that's something that I don't think physicists necessarily appreciate how important that is in all fields. So what do I love about medical physics since I'm still here? Do you want me to stop talking?
Your talk is officially over, but there's no talk next. So you can keep talking if you want, but I just wanted to let you know that the time is up. And if anyone needs to go to another talk, this is the time to go. Also, if you have any questions, Jennifer, not you, but if the audience has any questions for Jennifer or for anyone else who's talked, because I said this could be an open Q&A, then feel free to put them in the Q&A box. But Jennifer, if you want to tell everyone why you love medical physics, I'm interested to know. So I'll mute.
Sure. Just let me know if any questions pop up that you want to have addressed. So like, why am I still in medical physics? Why do I enjoy being here? Well, there's lots of development going on, which Krishni talked about before, and Quan also mentioned. There's machine learning, artificial intelligence that's coming into clinical use very soon. I'm actually doing a lot of work related to that and how we're going to implement it safely clinically. And if we can automate some of that routine work, we should have even more time for these kinds of development projects, which is exciting. Medical imaging becoming more integrated with radiation therapy, like that's a really exciting development. It allows us to treat patients better and more accurately than we could in the past. And having that kind of collaborative environment is also something that I really enjoy. I also am happy where I am, like where I ended up. My work environment is this melding of the hospital and the academic, clinical and the academic. So because of the academic, I have lots of teaching and mentoring opportunities. The clinic is very fast paced, but we have a pretty large group of 13 physicists to spread out the workload. So it's not overwhelming and you always have someone to talk to. You're not the last line of defense. So it's a very collaborative environment itself. And then being at an academic institution, we also have a research group who's grant funded, and we can work with them to help, to get some research projects going. So my last slide that I definitely would like to cover, if I could, was just some advice for considering a career change. And my perspective, my advice, what helped me was to figure out what you enjoy doing, especially at the small scale. Do you love programming? Is that what you want to do? Would you prefer to work in a group or by yourself? What do you like? Do you like teaching? Is that your favorite thing to do? What else is important to you? Like location, flexibility, salary, benefits, whether or not you get to do research. Like these are all really important considerations for choosing any career. And then my other big thing, I know people, the physicists, they all know this is important and we all think we're really bad at it, but you need to talk to people. You need to build a network. And it's actually a lot easier than you think it is because physicists love to talk about what they do. All physicists love to talk about what they're doing. So I now know that I could have just emailed medical physicists in the Chicago area around Fermilab and asked to talk to them and shadow them for a day. And most of them would have been happy to welcome me in. But I didn't because I was nervous and I didn't know that I could do that. So you can. And also don't underestimate your skills. Many PhDs only think about hard skills, specific things that they've done. But industry likes PhDs because they're natural leaders with problem-solving abilities, right? Like you're not limited just by the things you have already done. They know that you're smart enough to pick up new skills, to look at a problem you've never seen before and figure out how to address it, right? Like that's something that PhDs do really well. So that's a skill. It's something you could put on your resume. So I think, yeah, here's just a list of some projects that I'm working on in the clinic. So this is my on the side stuff. And I'll just stop there and see if there are any questions.
There are some questions. And I think the point you make about the cold email is so spot on because, I get cold emails from students and I answer them and I cold email people and I'm always shocked that they answer me. But I'd say like 98% of the time people answer me and it, don't underestimate it. It works. You just gotta send it. So
yeah,
great
absolutely.
advice. So there are two questions that we have that have come in. So how do you feel about how you started and where you are now? It's a two-part question. And then except for jobs, like what about particle physics didn't excite you?
So how do I feel about where I started? Well, for one thing, and one thing that I've made a point to people who have asked, is that I don't regret starting in particle physics. Even though I ended up in a different field, I loved being in particle physics, and also I picked up so many skills in particle physics, one of which was that working in team environments, also getting used to presenting all the time. Particle physics is one of those fields where, as you have a large group of people, you're constantly having to present your work to different groups of people to just keep everybody informed on what's going on. So that helped me become a better presenter. It helped me learn how to communicate. All of those skills that I picked up as a particle physicist were really valuable, and I don't regret anything about that pathway. But and now I'm forgetting what the second part of the question was.
I already checked it. Besides jobs, what didn't excite you about particle physics?
Oh, right. Yes. Well, so I did feel a disconnect. Like I'd get stuck in meetings where someone is arguing about whether the significance of a result is 6 sigma or 6.5 sigma. And I'm sitting there going, why are we arguing about this? This doesn't matter. This makes no difference. And I had enough of those experiences that I was like, I want to be in a field where I'm doing things that I know matter. So that was probably a little bit of people that I was around, but for me, that was one thing that made me feel like I could be doing something that matters a little bit more.
That makes sense. Here's a good one. Is it doable for someone who uses a wheelchair to be a medical physicist? I think this is probably not just the job, but also kind of being in a hospital.
I would say that, yeah, being in a hospital is probably one of the best places to work as if you have some form of disability, because hospitals are specifically built to accommodate any form of disability. There will definitely be some challenges. I think that, some of the work that we do requires, obviously we're doing some quality assurance work with these machines, but I'm sure that you can figure out accommodations. So yeah, I think that actually medical physics would be a good field for someone to consider.
Great. We have time for the one more question that we have. We have 2 minutes. So it says ML and radiation, Monte Carlo, I'm guessing, and radiation were mentioned often for medical physics projects. Are there other options for subjects? So what are kind of more prominent medical physics projects?
Yeah, so I would say
that's
there's
probably because we talked about medical or radiation oncology in the last couple talks.
Yeah, it's true. And it's unfortunate that our one diagnostic physicist wasn't able to make the session, because she could talk more about, there's lots of imaging developments that are going on. Like we think that
you're talking about ML, right? They're talking about machine learning. It's not Monte Carlo.
Yes. So yes, there is a lot of machine learning, like artificial intelligence, AI stuff that's going on, and it's very exciting, but it's definitely not the only thing out there. So diagnostic physics, there's all sorts of work going into improving image quality with reducing radiation dose. So that's a big thing in CT imaging and PET imaging, is can we get the same quality of images or better with even less radiation dose to the patient? So better detector development, better software analysis of detector output to reduce noise, all that's going on. I have some examples on here that many of them are not related to machine learning. They're things like trying to predict toxicity based on how much radiation a patient's organ receives. What is the likelihood they're going to develop a toxicity from the radiation? A technical development project, like can we actually trigger the radiation to turn on when the heart is in a specific phase of beating? We can do it with respiratory motion, but that's much slower than the heart. So that's a new challenge.
Also there's the imaging world. There are new, as I was showing, the different PET agents. So half-life, lower half-life PET agents to be used for different purposes. Like if you have a cyclotron, like UV has a cyclotron that produces a special PET agent. So there's a lot of research going in the imaging world to identify these different new technologies.
Great. I
Yeah.
think that answers.
I also like to add this radiopharmaceuticals. So it's like PET, but not doing imaging. It's have some alpha decaying alpha particles to have some chemical substance to.
I think the
treat
best
cancer.
answer is reach out to your local medical physicists and find out what they're working on, because there's so many possibilities.
There are a lot of possibilities. I do want to go to our last talk of this session. I don't know how many of our speakers are going to attend the after hour or the networking session afterwards to answer questions, but everyone's welcome to that. It's the lower left-hand button. But our last speaker is Christopher Williams, and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks very much. So I guess I'll end this session with really just another vignette of, how somebody went from sort of a more traditional academic physics career into medical physics. And in my case, I went from astrophysics into medical physics. And just like Jen and Maduka and Quan and Krishi, I'll kind of tell you some of how my transition happened and sort of what were the thought process and how did I go about that. So throughout my academic background, I always had to focus on astronomy and astrophysics, primarily radio astronomy. And so I did an undergrad in sort of straight astronomy, looking at radio supernovae and active galaxies. And I did my PhD, again, focusing on radio astronomy and astrophysics, and in particular experimental and instrumentation development. So I worked on building a radio array in Western Australia to look at early universe cosmology. And so basically as far away from the human body scale as you can possibly get. But I think similar to a lot of the other speakers and maybe to a lot of people in the audience, as I was getting towards the end of graduate school, I knew a couple things. I sort of knew that I actually really loved what I was doing and kind of wanted to continue doing the astronomy research and astrophysics research that I was doing. I loved working on instrumentation. I loved kind of going to interesting places, working on interesting experiments. And, I thought that was, really fulfilling. But I ran into, I think, a dreaded physics problem that a lot of people run into, which is the two-body problem. And, so I had a significant other, my wife, who's in medicine, in the medical field, with very low geographic flexibility. And, that makes it kind of difficult when sort of the next steps in your career are, do a 2-year postdoc or a 3-year postdoc, at this institution, and then move in another 2 years to another institution. And, that posed a lot of potential challenges for me in sort of other areas of my life. And so, my primary interest was in developing new instrumentation and instrumentation techniques. And at the time I was graduating grad school, the best opportunities were outside the USA. And, so that was kind of what sparked me to think about, okay, well, I love what I'm doing, but are there other things that I could also, find really interesting and compelling? Because, throughout my career, I'd never really thought about that question all that much. So I knew that I wanted something that, first had more stability and more geographic flexibility than sort of doing a couple astro postdocs and then hopefully, finding a faculty job somewhere. So I first considered what I think is a pretty well-worn path, going into software development or engineering. And I knew several other graduate students who were considering that and who had done that before me. And there were a lot of opportunities in those areas. And so, that was something I was thinking strongly about. But for me, they didn't seem like a perfect fit. There were a few things I really wanted that sort of were on the more academic side. I really wanted to continue doing sort of research that I could, kind of direct and sort of choose. I also really wanted to have opportunities for teaching and mentorship. And I also wanted to do something that had a really, sort of strong sense of mission that I felt really passionate about. And, I felt that way about astrophysics, and, there are a lot of things in engineering that I would feel that same way about, but it kind of winnows the pool down a little bit. So, those were kind of the things going through my head and thinking about this switch. So I think just like a lot of the other speakers mentioned, medical physics isn't something that's necessarily on everybody's brain or on everybody's mind when they're thinking about careers. I actually never had heard of it until my last year of graduate school. I had no idea that medical physics was a discipline. And for me, it was a serendipitous event. I was speaking with one of my friends at a mutual friend's wedding, and this friend, who was one of my really good buddies in college, was doing an MD PhD and working in an imaging lab with medical physicists. And he said, hey, if you're thinking about fields and that a physicist would be really good at, you should really think about this. You do a lot of imaging analysis as an astrophysicist, and this would really be in your wheelhouse. So, it was took a serendipitous event for me to kind of get this spark to start thinking about it. And as I started looking into it, I realized this checked a lot of the boxes that I was looking for. There was the opportunity to do research, to teach, and to have a really immediate real world impact, which is something that I really liked the idea of. So I began researching, and sort of just like we were talking about in the last session, I just reached out to some medical physicists. I actually reached out mainly looking at residency program directors, kind of asking them, hey, I'm coming from a background where I don't have any prior medical physics experience. Is this something that, I might be a good fit for? Is it worth applying? And funnily enough, one of the programs that I reached out to, the program director wrote me back. I was asking whether they had a residency slot available that year for somebody with my background. And he said, we don't have a residency slot this year, but I used to be an astrophysicist. Give me a call. And, so I called and spoke with them. And, kind of basically, it was really affirming to hear that there are people who have backgrounds like mine that, can end up with very, sort of breaking into the medical physics field, and actually through a pretty smooth transition. So I decided to apply to residency programs, and sort of like we were talking about, coming without sort of a prior background in medical physics, there's fewer programs you can apply to, but typically ones that are a little bit longer than 2 years, but that basically kind of combine a postdoc with sort of some of the coursework that you need to bulk up your background. And at the time I applied, there were sort of a half dozen programs that would work for this, and I think there are more now. The other route would be to do a postdoc at a place where you could sort of do these certificate courses, just as Yuka kind of mentioned earlier. And I also applied to some astro postdocs, and I was lucky enough to have several options in each, but I really wanted to stay in Boston for sort of personal reasons. And I was lucky enough to just like Chen did, to go to the Harvard Medical Physics Residency Program. So what do I do today? I'm on the faculty at Harvard Med School, just like Chen, at Brigham and Women's Hospital, so sort of the partner hospital across town. And I'm one of these medical physicists that has a little bit of a hybrid role, where I spend part of my time doing purely clinical work, most of my time doing purely clinical work, but also part of my time doing grant-supported research. So on the clinical side, I lead a clinical program where we're integrating advanced MR guidance and imaging technologies with radiation treatments for cancer. And then I have a small research group with varied between 1 to 2 postdocs, where we're developing new image guidance techniques. So what's a day in the life look like? What do I do on a day-to-day basis? You might find me on a random day doing clinical coverage. So it's kind of the bulk of my job, where we'll actually go participate in radiation therapy delivery treatments along with physicians and radiation therapists. And so basically, I'll sit at a computer running an optimization to figure out the best radiation treatment plan we can deliver for a patient that's on the table in front of us. So it's it's running an optimizer and trying to understand sort of a lot of the complexities that go into the treatment, but with the added time pressure that's a patient on the table right now, and what you do really, really, really matters. I also do things like machine quality assurance that we talked a little bit about earlier, and treatment plan checks. On the research side, it's just like any other sort of research you might think about, meeting with postdocs and students, and also writing grants. Most medical physics positions, if you're doing clinical work, are sort of hard money, but your research is supported by grants that you get. And I do a couple different areas of research. I look at ways of reconstructing motion to account for patients' breathing. I also have a couple projects on virtual reality. So just to kind of wrap up here, there's also teaching, leadership, and program management, and a lot of things that sort of you would do in other areas of physics, but that also sort of parallel with medical physics. And I'll just kind of leave this up here, that there are a lot of similarities and differences between astro and medical physics, but I was just really shocked by the total sort of how many things translated really well. And so I kind of end with a message similar to what Jen, our last speaker, said is, don't be afraid to reach out to people. There's a lot of people that have made this transition, and it works out to be a pretty good fit coming from an academic physics background. And really don't sell yourself short. Just because you don't have a background in this field doesn't mean what you've done in undergrad and grad school won't be actually great training for this new field. So thank you, and hopefully have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you. And I personally, I guess, never realized how much astrophysics would have prepared you for medical physics, but the imaging part of it, of course, would be fantastic preparation for medical physics.
Yeah, it was actually really, I mean, you're working with a different file format. In astrophysics, we work with FITS files a lot. Now it's DICOM files, but exact same thing at the end of the day. And I was doing tomographic reconstructions in astrophysics, and we do that all the time in medical physics. And actually, a couple of the research projects I'm working on are basically taking algorithms that we kind of use day to day in medical physics, in astrophysics, and applying them to image reconstruction challenges in medical physics, in ways that people aren't doing it. So I think it's kind of a really actually neat competitive advantage thing you actually might have is that, coming not from the linear path, you have a lot of kind of outside knowledge that you can bring in.
Yeah, that's actually so true, what Chris said. You look at the field with a different set of glasses, and that's where I think you can also come up with out-of-the-box solutions.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That's the close of our session. So I want to thank all of our speakers in today's session. It was a great session. I hope everybody in our audience enjoyed it. And if you click on the link below, join after session networking. Hopefully some of our speakers will be there and answer some additional questions that you have. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your weekend and the rest of the conference.
Yeah.
You guys have an idea what the link she's talking about?
Should we just stay here, or should we go to a different link? I'm not sure either. So let me see. I think
we should stay here.
We should stay here.
That's what I think.
Let me look.
She mentioned a link. I don't know.
That's for the participants, right? That's for the participants.
Video.
I think if you go to the APS site, there's a link under the session.
Huh?
Josh?
It's good to see you all, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Josh. Josh, what are you saying?
The post-session networking Zoom, the link is on the APS site on the viewing platform.
Viewing platform? How do I go there? Let's see now.
You need to go to the APS website and say join the meeting.
Okay.
And
APS website.
Go to the sessions. Yeah, there's a link, join after session meeting networking.
Can you put that on the chat?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
So can you see this link?
Yes, thank you.
Just have to log in, I think.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm going to leave and join.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.